And if you want to talk about the success that we had in Iraq with the quote-unquote surge, it was that when we took ground, we held ground, and we stayed out there and denied this guy his sanctuary. We dried up his holes. That's the type of mentality that we have to have at a strategic perspective. Now, the second thing that is very clear for a strategic objective is that we must cut off his flow of men, material, and resources right now. Because as you know, I mean, when you put the pressure on them in Iraq, then they transit over to Yemen or they transit over to Afghanistan, and we must be able to follow them. We must be able to cut that off. We have to interdict his flow of resources because that's how you dry up his ability to fund himself, resupply himself, and also to replenish his ranks. But yet we have not really been able to connect the dots and understand that. I mean, already we see a relationship that's building between the Somali powers and the operations that is happening there in Yemen. Not too far across the waterways they have to transit. Second most important thing. The third most important thing from a strategic perspective, we must win the information operation war. We never do a good job with that. They're killing us on these terrorist websites. They're getting their message out. We're not getting our message out. When I remember what happened with Israel, with that flotilla, and the guys fast roped down, and I was sitting there and I was watching that tape, and I told my wife, I said, those guys got paint guns on their back. She said, how can you tell? I said, I can tell the little skinny silhouette of a paint gun. But yet what happened was that the other side took that and they turned Israel into the aggressor. We've got to do a better job of beating them as far as the messaging. We've got to do a better job of getting the word out. We've got to do a better job with our psychological operations units. You know, when I was in Afghanistan, one of the simple things I asked of a State Department representative, I was down in Kandahar, why aren't we establishing more radio stations on some of these larger bases that can broadcast locally? Get some of these young Afghan soldiers on and talk about what they're doing. Talk about the pride that they're having in their country. Talk about the things that the Taliban is doing so that you can turn people. And if we don't understand that at a strategic level, and part of that is our own media. I hate to tell you. You know, I see more stories about us doing things like Abu Ghraib, how many pictures did we see about Abu Ghraib, than I do about the bad things that the enemy is doing. You know, just last week, we lost over 14 soldiers in Afghanistan. I'm not talking about that anymore. When our media sees themselves as a ideological political wing, I got some serious concerns about that. Because part of a nation's power, the dime theory, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And if we can't take our own informational national power and use it as an asset for us, then we're going to lose our country. The last most important strategic objective that we have to have is that we have to cordon off this enemy and we have to reduce his sphere of influence. We got to shrink down where he is. And we're not doing that. We're allowing them to come into the United States of America. What happened with Major Nidal Hasan should not have happened in the United States of America. And I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. And anyone that wants to deny that that was a part of the 21st century battlefield, you got your head in the sand. And unfortunately, when you put your head in the sand, you expose a certain part of your anatomy. And that's what we're doing a lot in this country. We're turning a blind eye to a very bold enemy that is telling us exactly what he wants to do. But it's up to us, and it's up to our elected leaders, and it's up to our strategic level military officials to come up with the right type of strategic perspectives in order to combat against them. It's not a war in Afghanistan. It's not a war in Iraq. Those are combat theaters of operation. That's that second tier, the operational theater of warfare. Up here is just the strategic theater where we have missed out on the right goals and objectives. Next thing I want to talk to you about is very simple. We got to understand the economic impacts on this 21st century battlefield. See, if you go back and you look at what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union did not collapse militarily. The Soviet Union collapsed economically. And there was one country that paid really close attention to what happened. And that country was China. And now we find ourselves on this 21st century battlefield. There are, to use the expression, there are kinetic battles that we're fighting, and there are truly non-kinetic battles that we're fighting. And part of that is an economic battle that we're fighting. And we're providing an advantage to China with the trade surplus that they're able to build up, the fact that they own 29, almost 30% of our debt. But see, the thing to realize is that China's not taking that to improve the standard of living of the Chinese citizen. China has taken this economic advantage that they have on a 21st century battlefield. In about 8 to 10 years, the world's largest blue water navy is going to fly under a Chinese flag. Now, why is that important on the 21st century battlefield? Well, I just have to tell you, 70% of the mass of the earth is what? It's water. And you can go back to all the great civilizations, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Athenians. At the turn of the century, with the Portuguese, with the Spanish, with the Dutch, the English, the Japanese, everyone knew that the means by which you extend the power and the reach of a nation, and it's going to hurt my heart saying this, is not through a great army. It's through a powerful navy. And in 1990, we had 546 naval war vessels. Today we have 283. And if you cannot protect the sea lanes of commerce, if you have 4 Americans that get murdered right under the shadow of a naval vessel, it bodes future problems for our country. It's very important for us as far as economic impact where I am in my district because we have Port Everglades, world's busiest cruise port terminal, $98 billion of revenue. And it's very important that in 2014 the Panama Canal will expand to bring in larger cargo shipping. But it's the Panama Canal that the United States of America built that is now controlled by Chinese contractors.